Good morning to those of you on the stream. Joining me today here at Global Affairs Unfiltered. As soon as this music quits, I will take over at K-Talk. Good morning once again, everybody, and welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered with me, Jack Stockwell, here through K-Talk Radio. 808. This 9th day of June, 2026. I received an awful lot of very nice congratulatory email when I had my self-pitying, deprecating comments last week. Well, whether I should stay with this or not, because I know I've lost a portion of my audience, because I'm just not going to sit here and do a bunch of ballyhoo for the administration in Washington when they are in, from every point of realism that I can see, they're owned by the Zionist lobby. And I don't know what the Zionist lobby has on them except massive contributions to their re-election campaigns, to the donors. Maybe they have something more, which of course makes us always wonder, what does Netanyahu have on Trump? What does Trump have on that? You don't have to have anything on Netanyahu, because as soon as the Israeli government stops supporting this war, and they're not having martial law any longer, then Netanyahu's on his way to jail. And there are those just chomping at the bit to throw him in jail as fast as possible in the Israeli government, because they do not like what he's done. But as long as martial law is in effect, that he's protected. But on the other side, back on this side of the ocean, what is it that he has on President Trump? And so Trump will come out and say, well, Netanyahu's going to do what I tell him to do. Yeah, well, we'll see. And now with all of the this ceasefire that's gone on for a long time now without ceasefiring, especially with all the firing that went on in the last 24 hours of missiles and rockets back and forth, it's just kind of hard to say at this point which of the, thank you, Sam. It's hard to say at this point which of the regional crises, Ukraine or Iran, is the more dangerous one, because both clearly have the potential of either triggering a global war or a global depression. I don't know if you paid much attention to what Putin said the other day in St. Petersburg, but he was describing, it was surprising to me, describing the beauties of the Oreshnik missile, explaining it in detail. We're just, every day that unfolds now, and it's not just every day, it's every part of the day that unfolds, if you pay attention to the news from various sources. And I take in a lot of sources. In fact, I think I have enough sources that if I were to listen to each one in its full entirety, there wouldn't be enough time in the day to get my work done. So I look here and there. I'm accused of being overly biased because of my sources being biased. But let me tell you something. Every source is biased. Everybody is biased. Not being biased is biased. You just have to sort through and find out what makes sense. And that's one of the first things I do when I take a set of x-rays on a new patient. I look at the pictures and I look at what's wrong biomechanically. What's happened to the skull and this neck that it's in this kind of configuration that I'm looking at before I ever analyze the film. My first thought is, does this film make sense? Because if it doesn't, I'm going to take another one and change the angle a little bit because the picture has to make sense in a biomechanical presentation. So when I hear something new in the news that comes down the pike, I have to ask myself, does this make sense? Does this fit into the pattern that these various personalities or governments or dynamics represent? Or does it seem like it's outside the pattern? Now, if it's outside the pattern, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means you got to look at it a little closer to see if a curveball has been thrown. Because you don't want to strike out from a curveball that's legitimate. So, whether you're worried about Iran or whether you're worried about Ukraine or whether you're not worried about them at all, you're worried about, and I don't want to sponsor worry, but if you're going to worry about something, worry about the long-term effects of what's going on the other side of the planet in your backyard. What's going to happen to fuel prices through the summer? And food prices, especially meat. What's going to happen to the water supply here on the Wasatch Front and throughout the whole drought-stricken state of Utah? My beautiful state of Utah. I was not born and raised here. I was born and raised back in the East. Came out here with my friends at BYU in fall of '68 to go to school and absolutely fell in love with Utah. And Utah's my home. And if someone anywhere on the planet were to ask me, where are you from? I'm from Utah. Good old Utah. Right on the Wasatch Front. Because this is my home. And I'm much more worried about the Wasatch Front than I am about Iran or the Ukraine. Not just in the sense of water, but what the decisions that the administration in Washington is making that has worldwide catastrophe written all over it. That was just fine before February 28th, when the United States and Israel launched its unprovoked war of aggression against Iran. And the battle cry, of course, has always been, we can't let him have a nuke. We can't let him have a nuke. So, not to give one or the other the advantage, Ukraine or Iran. Since one has to start somewhere, let me just start with the situation in Iran and Southwest Asia, where the Iranians resumed for the first time since the so-called ceasefire the bombing strikes against Israel. Now, of course, this was the reaction to the continuous IDF strikes against Hezbollah in the case of the Hezbollah headquarters in the suburb of Beirut. And then the Iranian officials responded immediately with warnings. This rabid dog must be disciplined and put into its place. It's easy for one side to start making comments like that about the other side, but I don't remember that kind of verbiage coming out of the Iranians. This rabid dog, referring to Israel, must be disciplined and put in its place. So the Iranians started the launch. I think altogether about 11 missiles, biggies, mind you, against Israel with explosions. Unclear what the damage was. Trump immediately was on the phone with Netanyahu, telling him, don't retaliate. And according to Ynet, he urged Netanyahu to wait for a few days to see if a deal can be reached with Iran. And I don't think that had much effect. So there are obviously still negotiations going on involving Pakistan and others. And if you look at the dynamic as it is right now, it's very, I don't want to say unlikely, but not very likely that these negotiations are going to go anywhere because each of these parties has a logic not to end the war. And then there are these unconfirmed rumors that Iran has a nuclear bomb, which I don't know. I would If boy, if you're going to try and pin me down, Jack, do you really think Iran's got a nuke now? And I would say, where did they get it? You might suggest North Korea gave it to them, or China gave it to them, or maybe even Russia gave it to them. But they didn't do it themselves. I don't believe they would have done it themselves because of the fatwa from 1983. There will be no nuclear weapons made by this government because it is against the will of Allah. Now, of course, since February 28th, the ground rules have changed somewhat with the murder of the Ayatollah, who was the one who issued the fatwa, who said there will be no nuclear bombs. So, Jack, do you think that Iran has a nuclear weapon? I would say 60-40 for it. And then there's all this loose talk coming around from several sources that they're going to find a spot in Iran where they can set off one of these bombs to prove to the world, especially Israel, listen, you rabid dog, we have a nuke and we will use it right down in the center of Tel Aviv. So back off. Would they waste a nuke on a test? Of course not. If they've got one nuke, they got several. If they have several, the missiles are already loaded with those nukes. These are the kinds of things I wake up in the middle of the night and worry about. Or they don't have one. So I don't know. But it seems in the worst case scenario, the real problem is that this war is going to continue to escalate. Now, I don't know if you listened to Alastair Crook yesterday on the Napolitano podcast, who normally has a relatively deep insight into the dynamic of the Middle East because he used to be deep in MI6 and was a specialist on the Middle East. So I kind of like what his opinions are regarding current events. And he says that he thinks the war is going to continue until the West is falling off the energy cliff. In other words, that the continuous effect of the blocking of Hormuz and other ramifications of the war will increase the depression and the financial tensions until the cliff is reached. And that's what I was referring to at the beginning of the show here about my concerns for Utah. Now, I have a car that's paid off, and because I've mentioned this before, and I'm not bragging by any means, but I kind of bought it under the sales pressure that if I bought that Tesla when I did back in 2018, I'd have lifetime free charging from Tesla superchargers. So I have a car I don't have to pay for, and I have fuel I don't have to pay for. But my friends do, and my family does, and I still have the same high food prices that everybody else has. And this escalatory action taking place in that part of the world, especially with the Strait of Hormuz, even though there's ships going in and out of there every day, because they're following the rules that Iran has laid out. You will not deal in the petrodollar, and you will not be delivering oil to any of the allies that are against us. Otherwise, happy days. Have a good trip. That's just going to further strangle the West energy-wise. And so Alastair Crook is saying this is going to go on until the West is on the very edge of the energy cliff. Now, what would the energy cliff be? What would the financial cliff be in your family? You couldn't buy meat anymore. You couldn't buy your medications anymore. You have to buy gasoline. You have no choice. But suddenly, honey, you're going to have to walk to your soccer game. Honey, you're going to have to buy a bike and start riding to work. Is that the energy cliff? Because, I mean, the reason why I think that does not look very promising in respect to an agreement is because the new Iranian government somehow seems to operate from the assumption that the aim of Israel is the complete destruction and balkanization of Iran. And that has somehow mysteriously altered the Iranian viewpoint of how they have to conduct this war. Then naturally, they are holding the position that the ceasefire must be true for everybody or for nobody. That's their demand. The Iranian demand for the truce or ceasefire must absolutely include Lebanon and Hezbollah. Does that mean that Hezbollah will stop firing missiles into northern Israel? Yes, as soon as Israel pulls out of Lebanon. Is Israel going to pull out of Lebanon? No, they want Lebanon, and they want Syria, and they want Iran. So if Netanyahu would not be crazy enough, all the opposition figures, including Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, has been putting pressure on Netanyahu if you need that to keep going, because otherwise he would lose control over Israel's sovereignty. And obviously what is meant by that is essentially greater Israel control of Southwest Asia, which was what I was talking about. The greater Israel. It's going to go from the Nile to the Euphrates. That includes eastern Egypt. And former Prime Minister Lapid said that otherwise Israel, if we don't do this, Israel will just become a vassal state. So even the liberal opposition in Israel demands the complete destruction of Hezbollah and is protesting against the supposed attempt by Trump, if I understand this correctly, to bind the hands of Netanyahu in Lebanon. So these are what you call irreconcilable positions. And it basically means the war is going to continue on again and off again and on again and off again. And nothing's going to change except the time period escalation to where we come to the energy cliff that Alistair Crooke was talking about. What's this got to do with you? You should be making plans. You plan for the worst, you hope for the best, but you plan for the worst. It's like Paul Toscano, who used to be a regular on my show, a bankruptcy attorney. And I remember on the show once when he was giving advice to people creating a new corporation, a new partnership, a new corporation, an LLC, whatever. He says, start planning for bankruptcy right from the very, very beginning. Set things up in such a way that should, heaven forbid, based on market problems or management problems or whatever else you're facing bankruptcy, the steps are already in place to protect your assets as best as possible, should you have to declare bankruptcy. Well, to me, that's scripture. So what should you be doing now in case gas goes to, dare I say, $10 a gallon? Meat goes to $10 a pound? Now, the Israeli targeting of the Lebanese army has caused some major reactions, of course, all over the region. The Iranian, the proper pronunciation is Iran, not Iran. And I keep flopping back and forth because I'm trying to move towards Iran, more Iranian. The Iranian Foreign Ministry, of course, has denounced it, calling it a heinous crime against Lebanon. The Saudi Foreign Ministry has condemned what Israel is doing in Lebanon in the strongest of terms. Then the UN peacekeeping force, UNIFIL, expressed its heartfelt condolences to the relatives of the people who have been killed. An awful lot of innocents have been killed in Lebanon. Qatar considered the attacks a dangerous escalation and blatant violation of the sovereignty of what they called the Sisterly Republic of Lebanon. So, as you can see, this has continuous ramifications in the whole region, and the longer this continues, the more severe are the effects on the world economy, including the Wasatch Front. So I think this idea that it's going to go on until the West jumps off the cliff is not necessarily a wrong concern. Now, obviously, in that context, this fight about nullifying Section 224 of the National Defense Appropriation Act by the House Armed Services Committee member Ro Khanna is extremely important, because if that would go through, it would completely, I can barely say this without wanting to throw up. If that were to go through, it would completely merge and unify the United States and Israeli military complex, exchange of information, procurement, and just make it a single army, which would be, I would like to use an adverb, but I can't. An adjective I can't because it's not appropriate. Nightmare. Now, obviously, the Germans, and this is still being debated. I mean, it was defeated the other day, but it's not over with. The amendment that was in the military appropriations bill, 224, was defeated. It didn't go through because of some sensible thinking Republicans. And it still needs a 60-man vote, man-woman vote, to get it to pass, and they don't think they have enough to get it to pass. But it's still being debated, which means giving time for more arm twisting by AIPAC and the Zionist power in this country to get that thing. Do you know what that would mean? You combine the Israeli and American army under one procurement head? Now, obviously, this continuous support for Israel coming out of Germany, which was a major factor in why Germany lost the bid for the 2-year seat in the UN Security Council. I mean, it's a big factor in the whole situation. It's not limited to its effect in the Middle East, but also on German standing. I mean, in any case, there's this interview with this Israeli historian, Moshe Zimmerman, who very interestingly criticized a false understanding of Germans' raison d'etre towards Israel. So he was asked about Netanyahu wanting to destroy Hezbollah completely, whether that's realistic or not. And so he says it's completely against international law and so forth. And he says the blind support for Israel is extremely devastating for Germany, as you can see by the failed effect to get Germany in a 2-year seat on the UN Security Council. And he's demanding that Germany should be much more decisive in respect to their attitude toward Israel, because that would be the only way how Israel would understand they actually have something to lose. And he says it's a completely wrong understanding of what happened between 1933 and 1945. Ooh, this is getting interesting. Because if Germany is now supporting everything Israel does, it isn't learning anything from history. Because in 1933, when the Jewish businesses were boycotted, this is a completely different sanction or a situation than to have sanctions against Israel now. So this is a real powder keg. which, despite the fact that there are negotiations, and Pakistan is still involved in the negotiations, but I think it does require, the argument made again and again as if the United States would put their foot down, stop financing weapons, and put the squeeze on, it could be done. But that would require our duly elected president, Donald J. Trump, to free himself from his donors, from his money bags. And that's the question that can only be settled inside our country. Now, as I said, there's two major powder kegs in the situation, and Ukraine's, where you have the continuous warnings coming from Putin, coming from and when Putin talked about the Oreshnik missile at the St. Petersburg conference the other day, that was something else. But you've got these warnings coming from Putin, coming from Lavrov, coming from Rabkov, and many others, all saying that there's an absolute red line. And the Europeans have to understand that the continuous crossing of red lines will finally push Russia to a decisive answer to crossing those red lines. And it's not quite as explicit as Karaganov, but definitely going in that direction, where Karaganov said, all right, it's time for a tactical nuke in the Ukraine to show these people we mean business. Well, fortunately, that hasn't happened. But I wouldn't say it's off the table. Now, the Europeans, or better, not just the Europeans, but the so-called, more specifically the E3, meaning Britain, France, and Germany, are continuing their anti-Russian behavior that can only be classified as insane. There was, over the weekend, this last weekend, a meeting in London where basically the E3 and Zelensky decided to reissue or to support Zelensky's open letter to Putin demanding immediate discussions. Just the idiocy, the insanity, the craziness just never stops. We demand. You demand? You just had an Oreshnik missile down your throat in the middle of Kyiv. And there's a bunch more ready to be launched, and you're demanding? We're demanding immediate discussions, which already was dismissed by Putin because of a completely provocative list of demands that came from the West. But Keir Starmer, in this context, also said that according to British Secret Service, Russia will be able to attack the other NATO states by 2030. Now, you know that Rutte said, I think he said it was like 5 years. The British General Chief of Staff, Richard Knighton, said this is the most dangerous period right now that we're facing in his 35-year career. And the British are planning to announce a new 10-year investment plan for the strengthening of their own defenses, which should be published here in the next couple of weeks or so, when the next NATO summit begins. And now Putin, for his part, in the context of a press conference in St. Petersburg this last weekend that I've been mentioning on Friday, had published that the use of the Oreshnik in Ukrainian territory was not yet to the point of full impact. But they're still considering its use like this. And it could be, he didn't say it, but what he didn't say, that what he was saying that he didn't say, it could be on a much greater scale with much greater effects in the near future. However, it's a cost question because obviously, because many of the Ukrainian targets can be destroyed, completely, utterly, uh, in President Trump's words, obliterated by much cheaper Iskander-M missiles. But it's very clear that Russia has not used up all of the assets that it has up its sleeve by any means. Now, this is the sword of Damocles that's hanging over this situation. And if you hear, for example, what Scott Ritter had to say in his roundtable discussion in St. Petersburg, I mean, he should consider that there are also people who are not MERS or Starmer who are living in Europe, and he should somehow think if what he's saying is really appropriate, because Ritter kind of went far. But in any case, what is going on is that the German economy is in free fall. Absolutely unbelievable. According to the official statistics, the new orders for German industry dropped altogether on average 3.8% in 1 month from March to April, but certain parts of the economy are much worse. Now, I'm giving you these numbers about the German economy because Germany is not hiding this stuff. They're doing this stuff to scare the German people in preparing for war with Russia, which is why Volkswagen stopped making cars in one of their plants and started making tanks. Much to the chagrin of the German population, but they've got to convince the German population these things are necessary. Now, I'm bringing you these numbers because they have a reflection here in this country. This 3.8% drop in industrial production in 1 month from March to April. What would happen if you had a 3.8% decrease in your take-home check? Would you notice 3.8%? Certain parts of the economy in Germany are a lot worse than that. The automotive industry was down 5.3%. Could you take a 5% cut in your paycheck? The electrical equipment manufacturing in Germany was down 16%. The machine building, 7.5%. And there's a noticeable slowdown in other areas as well. And the family-backed entrepreneurs put out a poll where they say that 20% of their member companies will reduce jobs this summer. 20%, 1 in 5. And they say, despite these necessary cuts, we're trying to warn people of this pessimism spreading into the corporate sector, saying that there needs to be an immediate improvement on the conditions of energy costs and effective bureaucratic reforms, try to bring this military-oriented government back under control. And the head of the family-owned enterprises, Mrs. Osterman, demands that the German parliament should cancel their summer recess to have the legislation ready to go by autumn. Because if that's not done, she said, then the calculations cannot go into effect and the entire season will be lost. And for the first time now in the service economy, there are 5 years of no growth. Actually has been completely negative. Service economy, restaurants, hotels, vacation sites, spas, all the kinds of things that brings us some kind of entertainment, they were down 17% over the last year. Travel in Germany is down 22%. Now, if you take all that together, Germany is in a free fall. What is our interest rate here now in this country? It only has to go up 1 more percent to make home mortgages almost impossible for half of the people that could qualify for one now. And then the only other side, the only other places growing in Germany like crazy is Rheinmetall. That's their military-industrial complex. And they're hiring and buying up other branches. For example, they now have bought into marine ships fighting drones, air defense systems, ammunition factories, military vehicles, tanks, satellites, and various other things. What does that tell you? If you were German in the German country, under the auspices of the German economy, and you saw the biggest industry boom was in the making of bombs, what would you think? I mean, they're buying up the Bremen shipyard. This means 2,100 more employees. In any case, this is absolutely insane because the only thing that is growing is the military-industrial complex. And obviously, this is in danger of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy leading to war. Is there a parallel to the 1930s in Germany? Now, against that is the offer of Putin in the context of the St. Petersburg Forum that one Nord Stream pipeline is still in effect, intact. It should be opened immediately, he said. We will return to Germany cheap gas. We just have to have the German end open up the damn valve. But the German government won't allow it. Why? When we blew up the other pipeline, it was a business decision, of course, because we had a pipeline with Norway from the southern end of Norway into the northern borders of Germany near Hamburg. So when we blew up the other Nord Stream pipeline, and Biden essentially admitted it, they had to start buying gas from us in conjunction with Norway at 5 times the price they were paying the Russians. Nice business decision. I would never do such a thing, but if my prices for my patients went up 500%, boy, I might actually be able to get a vacation. Well, that's not going to happen. Just like it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, even though Putin last Friday said, we got the gas. You can have it. You can have it back like we used to do. So who's in control of this stuff? Who's stopping that from happening? Who is stopping Trump from stopping Netanyahu? You'd love an answer to that, wouldn't you? So this is absolutely criminal and a violation of the oath given by the German cabinet to let this go on like this, because the oath says that they have to prevent damage to the German people. I mean, the atmosphere of war hysteria in Germany right now is absolutely incredible. And given the fact that they have, it's been 50 years, I think, since the Helsinki Manifesto, basically demanding the indivisibility of security for military. It's time to rekindle the Helsinki spirit. So this event that happened in St. Petersburg over the weekend, obviously, a major event, 20,000 participants from 130 countries. And this makes the argument that Russia is collapsing and isolated completely ludicrous. There were many, many business deals concluded, and it's very clear that this is becoming a major center of economic cooperation. So then the issue that Germany lost the UN mandate is continuously drawing a lot of attention, among other things, from Africa, where in Nairobi, the former president of Botswana blasted Baerbock of Germany, saying she wanted to tell the Africans how to build their toilets. She wants to teach the Africans how to deal with rogue elephants. She said that. And this is basically, which has caused this result that's going on, this is absolutely true. On the other side, I think it's quite noteworthy that one of the key African industrialists, Aliko Dangote, one of, if not the largest entrepreneur in Africa, has now presented the Dangote refinery expansion project, which is going to invest 10 billion more to increase its production, basically making it the largest state-of-the-art refinery in the entire world because of all the oil they got, which of course is becoming increasingly attractive for foreign investment, even those who have just pure profit in mind. So, coming to the U.S., how much time we got left? Coming to the U.S., I can only mention that Michael McCaul, who is no good himself, nevertheless criticized Defense Secretary Hegseth for making inappropriate remarks during a speech for the 82nd commemoration of D-Day, where Hegseth called on the European leaders to do something about the invasion from foreigners, misusing D-Day for equating that invasion with the immigrants today is completely crazy. He's telling the European people, you're being invaded by these immigrants, and he compared it to D-Day. Now, talking to a patient about the Pope, I have a couple of patients that are just real solid Catholics. And I told them how much I like Pope Leo XIV. And a lot of the addresses that he's recently made since his investiture. And the absolute importance of his recent visit to Spain, where I think there were more than 1 million people at a mass that was headed by the Pope. It was a huge event calling for a revival of Alfonso the Wise, who was a key ecumenicist, building bridges with his translation schools in the three big monotheist religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the Pope was absolutely blasting polarization and called for a unified approach between the three. When I think we've had for the first time in a long time, if ever, a major intervention that what Spain is doing, what President Sanchez is doing against the wishes of the West is extremely good. So I think if you look at this picture, we are sitting on a powder keg. We're at a possible escalation of two regional crises into a larger war. And I want to spare the whole discussion around the nuclear bomb of Iran or not, but one thing is very clear. If this continues unabated, and the dynamics that are in effect now continue, I'm afraid the world economy is going to go into a deep depression, bringing this back around to the Wasatch Front. What are you doing to prepare for this? And the danger that the already bankrupt financial system in our country will blow out in the near term is an acute possibility. So this whole situation calls for a renewed effort for a new security and development architecture that Putin has been calling for, which is a reorganization of the financial system into a credit system along the lines of the, I suggest the 4 laws of LaRouche and the 10 principles of the extended OASIS plan from Schiller Institute that would include the Bering Strait Tunnel, which was mentioned by Kirill Dmitriev. Remember, they did that, they talked about that a year ago in Anchorage. And it's still alive from the Russian side. The American side, Marco Rubio, Hegseth, other people are just, that's ridiculous, that's nonsense. You can't build a strait. You can't build a railroad under the Bering Strait. when there's plenty of engineers who are saying, oh, yes, you can, for less money than you think. And what that would do to open up world trade. So there's odds and ends out there floating around in a very, very clear, visible, but natural, I mean, we can't get away from the powder keg possibilities. And at no moment should we reduce any of your efforts in not being afraid of, but planning for the future, especially this summer. Because if there are Russian missiles landing anywhere into Europe, as Putin is saying, they have warned and warned Germany, England, France, if you send parts to the Ukraine, even though they're established and made operable in the Ukraine through the last minute manufacturing, they can't be launched without your help, which makes you party to the game and a legal target. Now, how many times does Putin have to say that, or Lavrov, or Karaganov? And with that situation around Israel, at the same time, we're sitting on a complete powder keg where nobody knows what Netanyahu is going to do if he's pushed further against the wall. And I don't mean the Wailing Wall. So the extreme tension between, on the one side, the danger of annihilation of humanity and the end of our species, and on the other side, a whole new paradigm that so many nations in the global south and BRICS is trying to bring to the stage of economic and security architecture that would allow the development and the continued sovereignty of individual nations to develop their own natural resources with help from financing of the BRICS nations' united efforts based on a gold standard. That exists out there as well. And the West does not want that to happen. The West does not want the end of the petrodollar. The West does not want the end of American military guaranteeing the security of the planet in the interest of British banking system and Wall Street, who do not want to let go of their control of this planet. And that's kind of what it comes down to. That's what the battle is over. Who's going to control the cash? Who's going to control the credit? And when you have more and more of these countries that have been under the oppression of colonial theft, robbery, dominion, assassinations, now seeing a light at the end of their indentured tunnels and clamoring for a chance to join BRICS as a part of the global south, even becoming part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, even though they're African countries, South American countries. They see the light. They don't have to kill their neighbor to get ahead. They don't have to allow their borders to be inundated with American military in order to maintain world peace. And with the internet, oh my goodness, so many world citizens are waking up to the prison that they've been in for 500 years of colonial domination. And it's coming to an end, and the colonialists do not want to let go of the reins. And in the words of many journalists, analysts, strategists, they'll burn the place down before they let go of control. Well, like you, I hope that's not going to happen. If we can get more hardcore, red-blooded Americans, red-blooded Germans, red-blooded French, red-blooded Brits to see what their governments have done to them. You know, I think by 2050 in Africa, there will be 2.5 billion people wanting work. And that's what Germany, I mean, that's what Russia and China are offering these countries. You're going to have to pay us with your natural resources, but we will bring you water. We will bring you cheap electricity. We'll bring you highways, hospitals, airports, schools, universities, agricultural projects, hydroelectric dams. We know how to do these things. We know how to do these things cheaper than they've ever been done before. And that's going on behind the scenes, which gives me a lot of hope. So it's not a coincidence that at the same time, what is going on behind the scenes that would indicate a certain degree of negativity. I still see a lot of positivity. I see a lot of more and more movements towards world peace, which means there are going to be some problems in this country because the people who have the American government and the American Congress by the short hairs are not going to let go of those things anymore. Then you want to let go of the powers in your life. Tomorrow is a health show. I want to talk a little bit about disease and where that comes from and things that you can be doing now to prepare your families against the disease processes that might be upon us because of certain vagaries that might be inflicted upon us this summer. Anyway, you keep your wits about you. I'm going to end the recording here at K-Talk. Lowell is standing by, ready to get going. I'm going to end the stream. Thank you for those on the stream. I appreciate you doing what you can to help build the numbers. Because I know most of the stream is utilized later on in a recorded sense. So I'm going to end that now. You keep your wits about you. All's not lost. There's still some bright lights.